welcome back to the Recovery Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Abbasi. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and stroke survivor. Today, I'm happy to report is day 19 of the Plank Challenge, and guess what that means? It means it's rest day. I know, I can almost hear you rejoicing through your digital device. So just rest, and it's for me, when I have a rest day the next day, I feel like I'm so much stronger. It really is how it works for me. So hopefully you'll feel the same way. So today's episode, I'm going to be peeling back the layers of the Serenity Prayer. And I was thinking just this morning about how I began to understand, like truly ingest the Serenity Prayer. And I tackled it in pieces from end to beginning, which is interesting. The more I was looking at it, the more I was like, I actually started understanding this backwards. I wasn't even aware of that until today. And it started to become clearer to me from the last sentence to the beginning. So I want to take a look into this backwards process of understanding. So the Serenity Prayer is this pillar of hope for so many in recovery that are weaving through the ups and downs of sobriety and learning and practicing the 12 steps of the sobriety program. But my road to understanding the Serenity Prayer, to really get the prayer, began with me repeating it, reading it over and over and over again. And I'm talking years. I'm talking years repeating it and reading it over and over again. I was repeating it before I even stopped drinking, before I even began to consider actually giving up alcohol. I'd gone to some AA meetings and I got a sponsor, but I thought that this was what would make me stop. I did not, or hoped not, that I didn't have to put forth any more effort than just showing up and to the meetings and getting a sponsor. I was hoping that something would just happen and then all of a sudden I wouldn't want to drink anymore. And unfortunately, there was no way around me around me doing the work. I didn't learn this until much later. So I received at that time this glass plaque from my sponsor at the time that had the Serenity Prayer on it. And I put this glass plaque in the bathroom. So whenever I was doing my business in the bathroom, I would face it and I would read it. And I don't know why I did that, why I put it in the bathroom, other than it was really ugly. It didn't match any of my decor. And I also didn't want anyone to think that I was turning, quote unquote, turning religious. But I also wanted to be exposed on a daily basis, like throughout the day, to this Serenity Prayer. I was working at home at the time, so I was always in the bathroom, and I was drinking at the time, and everything wasn't working properly. So I was literally always in the bathroom. So when I stuck it there in front of me, nobody would see it. I was the only one that was going to see it, and I would read it every time I was in there. So the prayer starts off by asking God to grant me the serenity. But from where I sit now, looking back, like that's a tall order for somebody who just got sober, to be asking for the serenity, grant me the serenity. And that's why I had to read the whole prayer. over and over and over again. Because before practicing the steps and carrying them out, there was no way for me to even begin to understand the rest of the prayer. So the first sentence didn't make any sense to me. I didn't even know what serenity really was. I could look up the definition. I knew what the concept was. Intellectually, I knew what it was, but I didn't know, I had never felt it before. And I didn't realize I hadn't felt it before until I practiced the steps and I started doing the other things in the Serenity Prayer. So before any light of serenity could sneak into my dark corners, my dark place, I had to face and unearth this mess that was inside of me. And I did that through the steps. So I had to admit I was powerless over alcohol. I had to find a higher power. The key to finding this higher power was understanding that I lacked control of people, places, and things, that I wasn't it. I wasn't a higher power by any means. I had to do that internal inventory that we talk about in step 4, and I had to talk to another alcoholic about it. I had to start getting on my knees before I went to bed, which I didn't do until I was like 5 years sober, I think, 4 or 5 years sober. And doing that really solidified, it put me in a physical position where I could understand more that I lacked control of people, places, and things. So in a lot of times in my sobriety program, I had to do something physically to represent the action that needed to happen inside my head. So letting something go or turning it over, quote unquote, I didn't understand how to do that. I never understood how to let something go, to get over it. I never understood what that. It wasn't until I physically got a box, called it my God box, put little sticky notes inside it and a tiny little pen, adorable tiny little pen, and writing down something that I needed to let go of and sticking it inside the box, that I started to understand what mentally I needed to do. I was taking that thought that was in my head, writing it on a piece of paper so that it physically existed instead of just mentally existing. It physically existed, and then putting it in a box, meaning it's out of my control. I'm giving it to something else. At that point I was giving it to the box. And I called that my God box. So it represented me handing it over. And that is when I really began to understand. So in the same way, when I started getting on my knees and doing my nightly prayer, I didn't really have a visual of who or what I was praying to. All I needed to do was physically represent my size in the universe. And my size is so tiny compared to people, places, and things in the entire universe that by getting next to my bed and kneeling and putting my head down on my mattress on my hands or my fists, I was physically representing that I am powerless. And that helped me to solidify lack of control. And by solidifying that understanding that I can't control people, places, and things, I started to understand parts of the Serenity Prayer, learning that difference between what I can control and what I can't. So I had to start practicing courage by admitting my role in my relationships and making amends, part of the steps. So these steps really had to come first for me to really understand the Serenity Prayer. But throughout that time that I was practicing the steps, I was still reading the Serenity Prayer and repeating it to myself on a daily basis. Why? Because the people in the program told me to do it. And the second time I went to detox, when I got out, I made a commitment that I'm going to take all suggestions. I don't have to understand why I'm doing it, but if somebody's telling me to do it, I did it. And that was key for me. One of the many keys. So practicing the steps and then approaching step 10. Step 10 is where I live every day now. This, I believe, is where I began to understand how to pause. And this was a game changer, learning how to hit the pause button inside me. Everything else is still moving outside of me, and I was always trying to keep up with it. If something happened, if somebody were to say something to me that was hurtful, let's say, and then they move on, they're moving on, they're rolling with the speed of life, and I felt like I needed to roll with the speed of life also. And to do that, I had to respond, I had to react. And back then I thought reacting and responding were the same thing. But when I began to practice step 10, I learned that if I react, I'm going to have to go back through the steps and make amends again to whomever I reacted to. So I learned to hit the pause button, because the pause button saves me from having to make amends, from having to feel guilty, shameful, any of that stuff. I can just think about step 10 and save myself from a lot of grief, a lot of frustration. Step 10 allowed me to take each situation one at a time and choose to respond with a clear head rather than reacting on impulse. I have a prayer that I would read every night before bed that was telling me, like, pretty much, think about your day. Were you afraid at any time? Were you angry at any time? How did you react throughout the day? And I found that every night before I went to bed, when I read this prayer, I was less and less afraid. I was less and less angry. And instead, knowing throughout the day when I'm in a situation, knowing, I'm going to have to do my step 10 prayer before I go to bed, let me hit pause so I can make sure that before I go to bed, I'm not going to bed with some sort of anxiety or regret. So that really helped me too. A lot of this repeating the Serenity Prayer was what I was doing for many years, and repeating this step 10 prayer I did for many years. Just when I started having my vision issues, that's when I stopped reading that prayer because it hurt my eyes. But by then I had it memorized, So I just kind of automatically do it now. It's within me now because I've been I did it for 5 years. I really did. I did it for 5 years. Somebody gave me that prayer on a little tiny AA prayer book thing, And I read it every night before bed consistently. And so it's just ingrained in me now. And I'm happy that I did that. I learned that if I pause, then I don't have to go back later and make amends. I don't suffer through the frustration of trying to change things that I can't change. By pausing and thinking of the last line of the Serenity Prayer, which is the wisdom to know the difference of what I can change and what I can't change. By pausing in every situation and thinking about that, I was practicing identifying the difference, identifying in situations when I can control the outcome and when I can't. And that step 10 was what helped me gain the wisdom to know the difference. Step 10 did. So it wasn't until I got to step 10 that I understood the third line of the Serenity Prayer. And that's the one that I understood first. So this newfound wisdom started to dial back that fear factor for me. I wasn't so afraid of the unknown when I started being able to see that much of the unknown I can't control. I can't do anything about it. So why be afraid? Because it's going to happen no matter what, because I can't control it. So I realized the courage that I thought I needed in truckloads was more about tweaking the stuff that's internal to me, tweaking my thoughts, my reactions, my emotions. Since I was pausing without reacting, it gave me time to go to meetings, meditate on it, consider how I can respond rather than react. And with that kind of time, thinking, being thoughtful about my approach to each situation, the anxiety lessened, the fear lessened, as I approached each, taking action in the situation. I didn't need as much courage as I thought I needed to change the things I could. The fear was really tied to knowing the difference between what I could change and what I couldn't. What is on my side of the street and what's not? What do I need to clean up and what is not my junk? It was freeing to start to understand that. And hitting the pause button taught me how to embrace acceptance. Once I was able to, by gaining the wisdom to know the difference and taking the time to determine how to address a situation, if there was, in fact, something I could change, what was I to do with the stuff that I couldn't change? I didn't have a choice but to accept it. I didn't have to like the situation, just like I told my kids when they would eat dinner at night. You don't have to like the vegetables, you just have to eat them. It's the same thing. I don't have to like what's happening. I just have to accept it. If I can't change it, then I had to wrap my head around the idea that it's not my business. If I can't change it, then it's not my business. And again, if it's not on my side of the street, so I don't have to clean it up. I can't clean it up. It's somebody else's job to clean it up. That other person is only going to learn how to grow if they clean it up. So without that beat, which sometimes I would pause for just a moment before I respond to something, and other times I had to pause for a week. And that was usually because of my boss. But but it worked, and without taking that pause, then the Serenity Prayer is just, remains to be a string of words on the wall. And I mean that literally. I have 3 framed pieces of wall art on my wall in my sewing room, which my sewing room has morphed over time. It used to be a yoga room, used to be a meditation room. Now it's my sewing room. Anyway, above the mirror, it's a big mirror that I would do my yoga in front of. I have these 3 frames that are the 3 parts of the Serenity Prayer. And if I don't practice pausing, then that's all that is. It's wall art, But when I was doing yoga before my stroke, when I was doing yoga every day at 4:00, I did yoga. And when I did it in front of that mirror and I looked up, so when I did the tree pose, which is one of the yoga poses, I would look up at the Serenity Prayer. That would be my focal point for that pose. And I would read the Serenity Prayer and I would apply it. This was towards the end of the hour yoga session. So I was starting to come down from, the hamster running in my head, the hamster wheel running in my head. And I was able to apply that Serenity Prayer to whatever was going on that day in my life. And it was such a relief quite often to see that reminder. And I think that by doing that, while I was looking at it and doing the tree pose, it really, again, solidified the physical representation of pausing, of taking quiet time to consider what's going on in my life. What can I change? What can I not change? And it just continued to instill that Serenity Prayer in me deeper and deeper. So how do we make sure to remember to pause? I expose myself to the Serenity Prayer constantly. That's how I remember. I have had it around me for 7 years. It's constantly around me in some way. For me, looping that prayer in my mind during quiet moments, and during times that I'm feeling a little spun up, are a nudge to me to breathe, be mindful and thoughtful, and act with intention. I used to think that I could steer everything from my kids' relationship with their dad to my kids' decisions, as they're growing up, to getting folks to do things my way at work. And it wasn't until I fully stepped into sobriety and practiced the steps and began whispering this Serenity Prayer in some of those shaky moments that it made a true impact on me. And I finally understood what serenity was. And I've talked about that before. The moment that I felt, I was out walking, I stopped in my tracks, and I was like, this is what serenity is. It was at that very moment that I thought, there is nothing wrong. For the first time in my life, there is nothing wrong. I'm at peace. And that was a moment, that was a snapshot. I'll always remember that. And that was the beginning of the Serenity Prayer. So that's how it worked backwards for me. I was granted the serenity but I had to do all of that work to get there. And so each line of the Serenity Prayer really calls for its own attention. And I think that it's important, or it was for me, to read each line and pause and think about it and how to apply it. I mean, it helped in the beginning for me to just read it constantly. I had it in the forefront or in front of me physically. But reading it like that, reading it line by line, taking just one line and applying it to the situation you're in will allow you to really see its meaning in the situation, because it means something different every time I read it, depending on what I'm going through, what's happening in my life. The Serenity Prayer shows me how to move through my life gracefully, recognize my limits, and take action on the stuff I can actually change. For me, this prayer, this pause, has been key to building a foundation for my recovery and early sobriety, and it's been something that is just echoing in my head since. So I'm inviting you all to find a moment to pause today and say the Serenity Prayer at your own pace, in your own way, and see how it may apply to whatever is going on in your life. If you feel like you don't relate to having a God of your understanding, it doesn't matter in this exercise. What I encourage you to do is just don't obsess about the God part. Look at what situation you're in and think, what part of this can I control and what can't I? What can I change and what can't I? And practice that. Just practice that on a daily basis. What can I change and what can't I? And the more that I practiced that in every situation, I was gaining the wisdom. That's how I gained the wisdom. And then next, it's once you gain that wisdom, you may realize that you don't have to be so brave anymore. That's how I felt. So see if doing this fills you with some kind of calm or some sort of insight into your situation. And we may or may not be doing a Serenity Prayer Challenge next month for you lifetime listeners. So sneak peek. Thank you for hanging out with me today and for exploring my version of adopting the Serenity Prayer. I will talk to you tomorrow.